Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 26th of May 2024. I had to check then, and it's almost past midnight here. A bit of a late one for me. I do have to purge myself of all these ideas before I go to bed tonight. So this is the geopolitical news concerning the Ukraine war for today. I'm going to start with the French president planning on visiting Germany. First such visit in 24 years. I mean, this is a big 3-day visit to show the unity of France and Germany before the EU parliamentary elections in June. So I think it's a big message about where both Scholz and Macron want the European elections to go, which is kind of status quo, establishment politicians, which I think is good. I wouldn't normally be such a big advocate for status quo establishment politics, but I think in terms of European unity, it's super important. There's a lot on the line here, and going off and voting for like extreme parties or parties that particularly are not fans of Ukraine and are fans of Russia is a dangerous thing to do. And I think the European project is very much threatened, I think, by what might happen in June. Luckily, some of these parties are being seen to be the nut jobs that at least some of them are. It's not to say Euroscepticism is a nut job position, although I don't agree with it, but some of those parties like the AfD have really shown themselves to be problematic. So this is a big thing to seek to show solidarity over the European project, but also solidarity about Ukraine. There are many disagreements between the French and German leaders, says next to here, but they are now successfully seeking compromises. However, one of the biggest gaps in the country's relations in Europe is European defence. France is in favour of a greater European independence, while Germany believes that Europe does not have time to get its defence industry ready for threats such as Russian aggression. Interesting that Scholz seems to be someone that wants to follow the American lead, whereas Macron seems to be someone who wants to take a step away from American dominance and see an independent European Union in terms of security, economics, etc., etc. Anyway, that could be a very meaningful meeting between those leaders. We'll have to see. Denmark offers the EU a plan for Ukraine's integration into European defence. Danish Defence Minister Troels Lund Poulsen has initiated a joint appeal to the EU with his colleagues from Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands and Poland to integrate Ukraine into the European defence industry. Quote, we propose to develop an EU action plan for Ukraine's integration into the European defence industry as soon as possible. Among other things, this will ensure Ukraine's access to EU programmes in the field of defence industry and defence innovation, Danish minister said. That is going to be in light of lots of support going to Ukraine, lots of inward investment from European defence concerns into the Ukrainian defence industry landscape. There's innovation that's going to take place there. There's also a kind of strategic alignment between what the EU want and what Ukraine wants, which is obviously the repudiation of the Russian attack and politics. And so there is this deep alignment, and considering everyone seems to be agreeing that Ukraine will accede to the EU at some point in the future, it would make sense to get alignment in defence matters, a bit like getting, before Ukraine accedes to NATO, getting them using NATO weaponry, having standard NATO protocols, etc., just sort of easing them into NATO. This is kind of a sense of easing Ukraine into the EU by getting defence integration happening up front. So that's good news for Ukraine. President Zelensky considers the non-participation of Central Asian countries in the peace summit a weakness and urges them to join, even with a dissenting opinion. Now, I'm not quite sure, having read the Euromaidan press article here, it doesn't really, neither he nor the article gives any details on what Central Asia really means. I suppose I could look it up, but it's possibly a very particular term, but how far does Central Asia go? Are we talking Middle East? Are we talking sort of Persian areas? Are we talking as far as India? Nonetheless, he would like, even if they aren't like complete fans of Ukraine, we'd like to have them there. The US is going to be there, but obviously we heard the other day that Biden, I don't think Harris are either going to be able to make it. There's that big fundraiser. I don't know personally. I don't think that's particularly an issue, because I think it's more important that someone like Anthony Blinken's there personally, although you want the figurehead of Biden being there. You could argue it's actually more divisive if Biden was there. This could be clever. Actually, I hadn't thought about this. So a lot of people are slagging off Biden for not being there, but if Biden turns up to a big thing like that, then it becomes a Democrat thing. Whereas someone like Blinken turns up, it becomes an administration, a US administration thing. And in terms of the optics in the US, I'm not talking about optics elsewhere. So you might have someone from another country go, oh, Biden's weak here. Biden's putting his own fundraising before Ukraine. But actually, from a domestic point of view in the US, that's probably quite savvy, because the more Biden associates himself with Ukraine, the more Ukraine becomes a partisan issue and it becomes a Biden thing. And the more that happens, the more certain Republicans will react against that, such that they will not want to support Ukraine merely because it's a Biden thing. So I hadn't thought about that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Nonetheless, it could just be like the pragmatics of wanting to raise money. It's more important to Biden that he gets elected into the office again in November rather than Ukraine winning. It's not really an either or, it's just a prioritization of those objectives. Claire Daly, who is a very controversial figure, I've got a Vacnick soup from Pekka Kaluniemi to do about her, and Mick Wallace, another independent Irish member of European Parliament. Both of them are very, very sort of pro-Kremlin. Claire Daly, the independent Dublin MEP, has apparently gave a Russian spy contact details for a paramilitary held liable for the Omar bombing and facing extradition on terrorism charges. This is just another indication, that's a Times article, another indication that she is pretty much compromised by the Kremlin, really. Her and Mick Wallace were also associated with the Latvian MEP who has been found as having connections with Russia. She's a really controversial figure, very pro-Palestine. I'm not saying that's an issue per se, but really aligned with these very much anti-establishment positions to be, unfortunately, easily manipulated by the Kremlin. But I will do that. I'll do that Vacnick soup on her at a later date. It's lined up for an extra, but I always do so much content that I either don't have time for extras, or I don't think you have time for my extras. So John Ridge here saying, I go to deal with family matters for a few hours and Rishi is raising an army to invade France. Bit tongue-in-cheek. So what's all this about? Well, yesterday, just because I think this is possibly pertinent to Ukraine in this move towards a kind of militarization of Europe. And there have been other nations who have been changing their conscription rules. So we have seen some of the Baltic nations change things. We've seen Denmark, for example, I think getting more women involved in conscription, national service and whatnot. Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, announced, as I said the other day and detailed in a breaking news piece, he super quickly announced a general election on July the 4th. No one understands why, particularly. Loads of his own MPs, his own party are like, what the hell are you doing? This makes absolutely no sense. I think there are going to be 78 MPs not running again, like Conservatives. They don't have anyone to fill those positions. It was a PR disaster the way he did it. Really, really bizarre bunch of variables involved with that. And one thing he's rushed through this idea that seems to be like, on the one hand, some of it sounds a bit sensible, like, oh, okay. But on the other hand, it's completely unfunded and it's practically impossible. Like, anyway, what is it? So Okay, having ruled it out in January, Tories now announce plan for mandatory national service for 18-year-olds, choice of full-time placement over 12 months in the armed forces, or one weekend per month for a year volunteering in the community. So 18-year-olds will be able to choose between those two things. Selective full-time 12-month placement in the armed forces or UK cyber defence, where they will learn and take part in logistics, cybersecurity, procurement, or civil response operations, or volunteering the equivalent of one weekend per month, 25 days per year in the community with organisations such as fire, police, the NHS, as well as charities tackling loneliness and supporting older, isolated people. And that all sounds good. Like, some of that I'm thinking, yeah, I can get on board with that. But it's been met with quite a bit of criticism just because it's completely unfunded and completely impractical as it stands. As in, this is the sort of thing you need to put an awful lot of thought into, take years to sort of tinker with, and then go, right, here's the plans we've been ruminating on and how we'd make this work, rather than, oh shit, we're gonna have an election in a couple of weeks, quick, this. How and of course it's not going to be appealing to young people, so young people are going to be really annoyed about this because they won't want to do it necessarily, and this is appealing to the older generations who think the young lazy layabouts on the street doing crime and stuff, let's get them into national service. That's the appeal, and they want some of the voters that they are losing over to some of the other parties to come back to them, and this is something to appeal to those. I was listening to an analysis of this about just the whole charity thing, not so much in national service, but also the national service. There are loads of practical implications that are just not detailed at all. But in terms of charities, like, suddenly you'd have just like hundreds of thousands of people thrown into the charity sector, and it's like, have you all got DBS checks? I mean, you're working with vulnerable people. You can't just throw a bunch of 18-year-olds who might even be vulnerable themselves, or just not the right people, throw them in with vulnerable people and expect that to work without training, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, it's potentially a massive problem. However, why I'm talking about this here is because there is this element of national service that even the UK government is playing around with, and I think it is this indication that there is. I mean, I don't know that actually they have Ukraine in mind with this and the threat of Russia, but it is part of that larger picture of just a greater militarization of our societies at the moment. Argentina is joining the coalition for the return of kidnapped Ukrainian children. So, Ukrainian delegation headed by presidential advisor Daria Herasimchuk visited Argentina as part of President Zelensky's Bring Kids Back UA project. Argentina is a very big supporter of Ukraine. Milei is an interesting anarcho-capitalist kind of populist leader that has... there are differing reports of whether he's screwed the economy even more, or whether this is the painful part that he was promising before getting things back on track. You have to go through the pain barrier before things start sorting themselves out. We shall see. Last I saw, their inflation was the second biggest in the world, or the biggest in the world, and it's still the case, and it's just not looking good. But nonetheless, he's a strong supporter of Israel and a strong supporter of Ukraine. And Zelensky has, although might not ordinarily be the natural bedfellows in terms of political outlook, Zelensky does obviously need as many supporters as possible, and Argentina have been a useful ally in certain contexts, although Argentina obviously have a lot of other things on their mind at the moment. Russia is waging a large-scale campaign in Europe to disrupt military supplies to Ukraine, according to the New York Times. It's good to see New York Times reporting something that I think is super important, rather than doing a bit of doom reporting and being a bit irresponsible with how they do things. For example, that picture the other day that they had a caption that the Ukrainians blew up that building, and as far as I know, it wasn't the Ukrainians that did it. Anyway, US intelligence officials and allies are tracking an increase in low-level sabotage operations in Europe that they believe are part of the Russian campaign to undermine efforts to provide military support to Ukraine, according to the New York Times. People need to know, particularly in America, where there's a bit of a division over Ukraine, and where there's a certain type of person over there who is finding Putin an attractive idea, and that kind of authoritarian, conservative, possibly conservative Christian, traditional values kind of guy, they find that appealing, rather than understanding Putin as a dictator who is doing things to the Western world, including the US, but also to Europe and allies, that are outright like sabotage, espionage. This is, back to the Cold War big time, except possibly just a little hotter. Among such operations are publication sites, in particular the arson attacks on a warehouse in England, a paint factory in Poland, residential buildings in Latvia, and an IKEA store in Lithuania. And you can add, of course, that shopping mall in Poland recently, and other instances, including arms factories in Bulgaria, etc., etc. Russia are behind an awful lot. And I think mainstream media needs to communicate that more. And I think politicians need to communicate that more to the electorate. I think people need to be going into elections in November in the US and in July in the UK and elsewhere around Europe, such as the European elections in June, with the understanding as to what Russia are actually doing to each of our countries and each of our democratic institutions and the organisation of the EU and the organisation of NATO, what Russia are doing, really who Russia are. Strip back this idea that some people have that they are some attractive ideal, and expose them for what they are. And I think New York Times, it's good to see them writing articles like that. Here, just apropos to nothing in particular, other than obviously Ukraine war, Russia, nuclear war, and the potential apocalypse that faces us. This is someone putting together the endless timeline of Russia's nuclear blackmail. And all of these, they've gone consistent with mainly Reuters here, but reporting each of these instances of Russia making claims about basically nuclear war and making threats, saber rattling, etc., going all the way back, many years. And then when it hits 2022, you've got talk of nuclear going from 1999 through to sort of 2021. And, you might have a couple in a year, a few claims here, a few threats here. And it gets to 2022 and it goes bonkers. 2022, 2023, bonkers. And actually this finishes in July 2023. I don't know if there are any others, but just interesting. Here's a threat file of Russia's absolute bonkers threats concerning nuclear war. Again, who are Russia? Let's understand who they are. But that it's a bit. They are a paper tiger. They are a Potemkin village of threats. They put down these red lines, and then we cross the red lines, and they don't do anything. So, Russia is helping North Korea develop a reconnaissance satellite, according to Yonhap, South Korean media agency, which it plans to put into orbit soon. North Korea has conducted far more missile engine tests than expected, the source added. Whenever I read something like this coming from South Korean sources, my immediate reaction is, yeah, and what are you doing about it? Now, I know they're obviously doing stuff, but what I mean by this is, if Russia's helping North Korea so much, I'm not sure that they are so overtly, but South Korea should be helping Ukraine this much. And I don't know I know they've backfilled US stocks with South Korean ammunition, but their arch nemesis, North Korea, are openly cavorting about the political scene with Russia, and I would like to see a kind of a bit of the same from South Korea back Ukraine's way. This is Alex Jones. Sweet bejesus, what an absolute swear word. WOD. Alex Jones is the InfoWars guy, conspiracy theorist, absolute nut job that said that Sandy Hook was denied it and some kind of false flag thing or whatever, and taken to court by the Sandy Hook parents in the school shooting, elementary school shooting, and then he got done for that. but he's bounced back and is platformed by Elon Musk, among other people, and is just honestly, so he should be locked up. Why should he be locked up? For crimes against rationality. Alex Jones says Zelensky is a total NATO Soros puppet. Oh my goodness, it's just like, what would you like me to say, Putin? Putin, come here. Just Soros, right? NATO puppet. Anyone? Right? Okay, I just got to get this right. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Blah blah blah. Blah. He's just a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. Zelensky is now an unelected dictator, says Alex Jones. NATO is giving Ukraine heavy weapons to launch attacks inside Russia. The war is escalating quickly and threatens to destroy the planet. I wonder whose fault this all is. The West has given over $200 billion to the regime in Kyiv, and they stole most of it. The woman below needs to stop demanding we sacrifice everything for her civil war, he says in answer to goodness knows who. But it just, it depresses me so much that people are given a platform to spout this absolute excrement. Speaking of which, we have Donald Trump. This is apropos to nothing particularly, but it's amazing. You can guarantee, and we're in election season now in the UK, that there are going to be curveballs thrown out here and there. This is an interesting one because I can't quite understand why Donald Trump did this. But he went to a Libertarian Party conference. So libertarians are your small government, no government, the individual is God. I talked about Ayn Rand the other day as kind of like the godmother of libertarianism in the US with her Atlas Shrugged books and objectivism and whatever. So the idea that no government or very small government and no regulations. Now, libertarians were angry, actually, with Trump for his tenure because he whacked $8 trillion on the national debt, like loads of things that were not, started a trade war with China rather than free trade, is now promising tariffs on China and deporting 15 million people, which when you look at the Libertarian Party's manifesto, like honestly, I've read the Libertarian Party's website, although it's a couple of years ago. They're all for immigration because that's what a libertarian is. We can't put rules on people. A person, an individual is a god, and therefore, as soon as we start, it's all about liberty, freedom. So that's freedom to move, freedom to do this, freedom to do that, and we need to kind of self-regulate and etc. etc. Now, I'm no libertarian, right? And I think it's a thoroughly problematic ideology. But it's just odd that they decided to have Trump come and speak to them at their own party conference and then say, you guys should come and vote for us. And when they started booing him, it's really interesting. So he's so fragile, Trump. People think he's some, big guy. But actually, as a narcissist, where it's all about you, he's actually very thin-skinned. He's a bit of a snowflake, some might say. He's very thin-skinned. And when he gets attacked by other people in public, he goes on, he doesn't quite know what to do and just gets all prickly and goes on the offensive. So then went on the offensive to these people by saying, what's your 3% going to do type thing. And then they all started, there's more booing. It was just really interesting to see Trump, who's so used to having these amazing crowds. Of course, he was just in the Bronx recently, shipped a load of them in. It's like, this massive rally you got in the Bronx. Everyone seems to be white. And the Bronx is what percentage people of colour? Anyway, like he's used to being very much supported by the rallies he's at, and to be booed in public like this was really, really interesting. And it's just a curveball, and for those looking at the election and expecting falling crowds for Trump all the time. I think this is super important because I think Trump is a massive threat to Ukraine. Like, I know there are people in my threads still. I say this all the time because you're there, and we talk that think that he's going to be the best thing since sliced bread for Ukraine. And I just think you're just departing from reality to think that. Like, listen to what he has said. Look at the past. I did a whole video on him and his connections to Ukraine and his dislike for Ukraine because of being burnt before, and a dislike for Zelensky, and and his like for Putin, you just look at his past and look at the actual words he's said. Don't start inventing what might happen in the future. Listen to what he has said. Listen to what the people around him, like Steve Bannon, had said. Listen to what all his advisors have hinted about what will happen with Ukraine and what they want to happen with Ukraine. And to think that he would be any good for Ukraine is to just... I don't know. It's just not to be correct, essentially. I don't want to be too insulting here. Right, we're going to go to Georgia now, the country, not the state. Today, I saw some tweets a couple of weeks back when they were protesting in Georgia, and the people who got the wrong end of the stick. It was like, yeah, so I told you this is what happened if you do X, Y, and Z, or sort of blaming Biden or something for like protests in Georgia. It's like, no, it's not the state, mate. It's the country. Today was Independence Day in Georgia. Independence Day is Sakartvelo. Georgia declared its independence in 1918 and has built its future with pride and perseverance. Happy Independence Day, Georgia. May your country prosper and its people be happy and independent, says Nexter Media source. And their happiness is expressed in massive protests. A large number of protesters marched in Tbilisi. The march was organised in honour of Independence Day. Lots of those sorts of images and videos that we've seen previously. I hate it that you can't turn off the videos when they start playing. They won't let you do it. And some interesting, very seemingly contradictory messages coming out from the Georgian leader, the prime minister, who is from the Georgian Dream Party, that has been trending towards Russia more and more with their foreign agents law and with their political positioning over the last few years. So on Independence Day, Georgia's prime minister calls the president a traitor. So Zurashvili, I think that's her name. The president is not aligned with the prime minister and has been very much pro-EU, pro-West, and has vetoed the foreign agents law. So the Prime Minister's public speech on Freedom Square on Georgia's Independence Day again highlighted the acute conflict between the ruling party and the president. Quote, despite the existential challenges and numerous cases of betrayal, including by the president of Georgia, we have maintained peace in the country over the past 2 years, says Irakli Kobakshidze, that's the Prime Minister. But he's also said this. So Georgia is to return Abkhazia and Ossetia and become a member of the EU in 2030. By that, Nexter means to get back Abkhazia and Ossetia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, these two annexed areas essentially that Russia have stolen. Quote, our Georgian dream is to live in a united and strong Georgia by 2030, together with our Abkhazian and Ossetian brothers and sisters. A united and strong Georgia must become a full member of the European family in 2030. So he's then starting to position himself as advocating for closer ties with the EU and accession to the EU. Now, I talked about this the other day about do they double down, treat the protesters really violently and go towards Russia, in which case what's going to happen when the elections come, and are they just going to get absolutely spanked? So then do they try and rig the elections? Is that their direction of travel? Or do they go, right, let's read the tea leaves here. My goodness, everyone hates the direction we're going in. We're looking in trouble. Let's do a bit of an about face here and try and save this. Can we save as much as possible by saying, let's all get together. Yep, we want South Ossetia and Abkhazia back. Oh, that's interesting. So that's kind of anti-Russia. And we want to get into the EU by 2030, which is kind of what the Georgian Dream started off as saying when they were elected. They were elected on a mandate of closer ties to the EU, but they just kind of moved away from that over successive years. So he is a member of the Georgian Dream Party that has promoted the scandalous law on foreign agents, says Nexter. But yeah, interesting messaging going on there that seems, on the one hand, our president sucks, and on the other hand, Yay, EU, and yay, Ossetia and Abkhazia. So, yeah. Now, the US State Department is deeply concerned over Chinese military drills near Taiwan. Quote, using a normal, routine and democratic transition as an excuse for military provocations risks escalation and erodes long-standing norms, they say. We have seen these Chinese drills exercises grow in size. They're pretty much surrounding the whole of Taiwan, doing these military naval exercises and with their air force. It is pretty hot around there, and there have been these worries that the natural war will start sometime in June. I'm not sure if that will happen, but who knows? It is getting pretty prickly, and I have to say this is not helping. So this is the Chinese minister from the Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs. So this is like your number 2, your Deputy Foreign Secretary, saying and putting out an infographic of the PLA, so the Chinese Army or Chinese Armed Forces Joint Sword 2024A military drills. So as you can see there, Taiwan is surrounded, right? And then he says, seeking Taiwan independence is playing with fire. Those who play with fire will perish by it. Like, that is the Chinese Foreign Ministry saying, you mess around with your continued independence, you're all going to die. That's how I read that. Like, that's the translation of that. This is really dangerous rhetoric here from the Chinese. So when it goes back to what the Chinese planning on doing, and what they picked up from what's been going on in Ukraine, well, it looks like they're not deterred at all, and they're like, you mess around with us, you're gonna get it. And by the way, you're going to get it. Like, just it's really, really worrying, this kind of posturing. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how this develops. But you got to feel sorry for Taiwan getting surrounded by this aggressive entity. That's really, don't like it. It's bullying behaviour, obviously. Where have we seen that before? Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate you supporting the channel. Just to remind you that I'm going to do a talk on June the 15th in an Andover area in North Hampshire, and that is a talk you can come along to. If you check out the description to the video, you can see an email if you are interested. There's also the drone fund that we are raising money for, the people that are running the event that I'm talking at. They are raising money to send drones to Ukraine. Thank you so much already to Michael Winkler, Debbie Kennedy and Gail Bonnell, who have already donated to that. That's really kind of you on behalf of the people who are running that. They reached out, so that's great. But if you guys are available in the Hampshire area in the UK to pop along to that, it'd be great to see you. Anyway, in the meantime, thanks so much. Take care. Speak to you soon.